that we have Ann Tanabe joining us today. Ann is the CEO of Bio Houston, which is sort of our life sciences central trade organization here in Houston. Honestly, you have impacts all across Texas, so I always feel we're kind of constraining you to Houston, but it's in the name, so we'll go with that for today. In addition to that, Ann, I would say you personally have been a mentor to me. I think you've mentored like half of the ecosystem here. You sort of sit at the hub and just our topic, you know, is really thinking about how do we continue to like find talent, building on this conversation we're having about growing your organization, and has seen everybody. She's seen this story over and over and over again, and just has so many valuable insights, which is why I always end up going and talking to you. And it's just also just worth noting, in addition to being here today to help us teach, she actually has helped us incept, launch, and continue to run ACT. So even the fact that we're all here today, we should all definitely be thankful to Ann. So
thanks, Sarah. Good morning, everyone. As Sarah mentioned, my name is Ann Tanabe, and I'm the CEO of Bio Houston. Before we kind of jump in and go on to today's program, I'd like to share with you a little bit of my background, only because then you can kind of put the comments and what I'm making into context, right? So, you know, I've been in biotech since the late 90s, as I like to tell people, back in its infancy when it was all about sculpting fog and selling a dream, right? I'm not a scientist. I'm not a JD. I don't have my MBA. I'm like a 4-year undergrad liberal arts person from the mid 80s. And I say that because it's really important to understand the evolution of biotech. And in a city like Houston, where we're the energy capital of the world, right? And you put life sciences next to it, life science is really at its infancy. And so when I walk you through some of my comments, you know, kind of keep in mind, it's coming from a perspective of somebody who's been in the industry a long time, but yet this industry is still quite new. So I got into biotech from a very odd angle. My career was in investor relations for publicly traded companies. And in the mid 90s, I was living in Southern California, working for a company whose technology came out of Germany. It was in reverse osmosis. And we were doing wastewater treatment in the industrial sector. So think all of the refineries up and down the ship channel. And the company was going public, and the investment bankers from New York said, hey, look, it's probably a better idea to have this company based out of Houston than Torrance, California. So they looked around the room and they said, okay, who's mobile and who can go to Houston for 2 years while we get the company up and running, go public. So at the time, I was young, early in my career, no kids. They're like, you're going. Great. Let's go home and tell my family, hey, I'm going to Houston. They're like, Houston? What's in Houston? How are you going to survive in Houston, right? So I get to Houston and fast forward, you know, took the company public, ended up staying longer than 2 years, right? But got to a point in time where I was ready to go on to something new. I wanted to continue my career in investor relations, and I could have done it in the energy sector. But my husband was from California and I'm from Hawaii, and we wanted to go back west. So my husband's like, hey, look, I'm working on this project. It'll probably be done in the next year. Go find a biotech. We live in like near Rice, the medical center is right there. There's got to be a ton of biotech, because my brothers all tell me biotech is blowing up in the Bay. Get some investor relation experience, right? This is now like, you know, late 90s, almost 2000. He's like, it should be easy. Great, sounds good. 3 publicly traded biotech companies. Just 3 in this vast Texas medical center, right? So I knock on some doors, and I was very fortunate to get an opportunity at Texas Biotechnology, which was an organization that was founded by the late James Willerson cardiovascular company. And I worked at Texas Biotech and was very fortunate again, because at that point in time, and this is another thing to think about as you're forming your company, companies back then really were company. And what I mean by that is we called ourselves, you know, mini pharma. We had early drug discovery, right? We had clinical development, and we all had distinct pipelines. So not just next gen, but actually distinct entities in our pipeline, right? And the market would fund that, right? And so although I don't have a science background, I grew up in an environment where we had our own in-house animal lab, where we had early drug discovery, where we had a chief medical officer and a clin ops team all under one roof. Not like today, where everything is piecemealed and farmed out, right? And so I say that again to you because as you're thinking about hiring and starting your company, right, and using consultants, it's all about the mosaic of how you put the people together, right? Because you're building a company, but not in the old way where we had, 50, 60 people coming right out of the gates because you could get enough cash to do that. You're building companies today, kind of on a smaller scale. And that's a really big distinction and something to think about. So I came to BioHouston in 2011 after having a great career in biotech. The last biotech I worked for here in Houston was called Incisive Pharmaceuticals. We got bought out by Pfizer in a typical big pharma transaction. They cashed us all up, took the asset, but nothing for the people, right? They didn't take any of the people, which was okay. So I continued my investor relations career, went to the dark side, to the energy sector, but really missed being in life sciences. And so in 2011, BioHouston was very fortunate to get a contract with CPRIT. And the contract was to go outside of Texas to talk about the CPRIT opportunity to kind of sell the CPRIT story. And because of my investor relations experiences and the relationships that I had, I was, kind of primed, if you will, to do just that. So I came to BioHouston, and who are and what we are we? We're a nonprofit organization founded in 2003 to really help grow the life sciences community. And at the core, our members are all of the academic institutions, and then the companies that are developing the products, so whether it's therapeutic devices or digital opportunities, and even the CDMOs, right, that are making the product. And then the kind of service provider community that wants to transact business with the companies. And our aim is just to convene, connect, and catalyze. And so again, if you think about what I'm here talking to you today about networking and building relationships, that's really at the core of what I do every day for BioHouston. So hiring talent, I'm just gonna kind of jump right in. I think the one thing to think about all the time is know your company, right? And even if you're just one founding person, your company, your persona, you will have a corporate culture. This becomes so apparent and so important. I can't stress this enough. Sometimes people think, well, I'm just starting out, so it doesn't matter, right? But first impressions mean everything. So even if you're meeting somebody as company XYZ and you only have one person or two people on your team, that's still a first impression for your company, and how you present yourself and how you transact and what you emanate your company stands for from day one, it really does matter. When you're thinking about hiring talent, understanding your compensation philosophy, that's again, very, very important. We just had our CEO summit 2 weeks ago. And in a CEO discussion, the CEOs were saying, gee, it's difficult for us to recruit people from Boston and San Francisco to come to Texas. And I think one of the things in my experience, having worked in biotech at Incisive, when we were getting ready, we had a drug approved by the FDA and then a drug approved EMEA, Canada, and ex-US. One of the things the board and management decided was that when we recruited people, we were recruiting nationally and globally. Therefore, although the cost of living in Houston is lower, because we're competing for talent on a national basis, we paid national. And I think in the CEO summit that we had the other day, there was two schools of thought. I get it, cash is king, and it's so hard to raise that cash. But the CEOs have found that if you compensate folks on the national basis as you recruit, right, then you find that the conversation is much easier. Because if you think about it, if just say for easy math, Houston is 25% less cost of living than the national average, right? So you think, okay, I'm going to pay somebody 25% less. Well, guess what? That's probably not going to work, and it's going to be challenging because you're also asking people to come to an emerging market versus a market like Boston and San Francisco, which is much more built out. So understanding your compensation philosophy from day one, I think, is really important. Along with that becomes how you're going to give folks, or if you're going to give folks equity and what that looks like. Again, I have seen it so many times in the little startups when you start up these things and you don't have that kind of grounding philosophy and you kind of one off these different deals. I like to say side hustle deals, right? Oh, I'm going to do this for this person and this for this person. You reach a point in time where, you know, hopefully you're ramping and you're growing. And when you have all of these weird one-off ideas on how you compensated somebody, how you gave them equity and the like, when it now comes time to become more streamlined, it's really, really difficult. So having these thoughts and thinking about this from the very beginning, in my opinion, will serve you very well as you move forward. Know your company and don't oversell. In hiring, I found this out, you know, again, throughout my corporate career. When you're sitting across the table from talent and wanting to engage somebody to come and work for you, it's human nature that you want this to be a really great opportunity, right? So you tend to talk about all the good stuff, right? But this is a really hard industry, right? And we're all usually capital constraints, resource constraint. There's just a lot of tough challenges. So it's mixing that and finding that right balance about being passionate and optimistic about the work you're doing, the patients you're planning to help, and how you want to get that forward. But tempering with it and making sure that people understand this is still a high risk business, right? Because what I've seen time and time again is the folks that are doing the interviewing from the company perspective, everything's great, everything's rosy, you know, the person engages. The day that they're now your employee and they're on your side of the table, they get to see everything, the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? And then you have issues because if you've said that everything is great, and now once they come into your company and they just start to see the usual trials and tribulations, you can have problems, right? So keeping that balance of knowing your company, don't oversell, be optimistic, but always make sure people understand at its fundamental core, this is a volatile, high risk, really tough business. Job descriptions. Again, in the startup culture, everybody wants to say as directed. Like I know you're going to do a little bit of this and a little bit of that. The more you can have a, you know, detailed, not so detailed, but at least a good framework so that when you're out trying to talk to somebody about an opportunity, there's something to refer to, right? There's something to have your conversation around. Of course, again, this is an early stage company, so people will understand that things may change and there's going to be as directed. But the better idea you can give somebody about what you're asking them to do for you, how they're going to spend their day, is probably going to end up having you have a better match in the end, right? Because, you know, if you have 6 or 7 things that individual's like, you know, I don't enjoy doing that, I don't know how to do that, they'll exit the process quickly, right? But if it's something where people can see, hey, look, there's growth, there's opportunity, there's some stretch tasks, and this is going to be a fulfilling, you know, position, I find that people have better choices and more people coming to have the conversation. International students and international employees, I'll tell you that, you know, again, because we're home to so many academic institutions here, we do have a lot of international trainees and then international students. And as they finish up, you know, their PhDs and wind down maybe a postdoc, they're all looking to transition into an industry opportunity. This is something that as a company, you're going to have to figure out how you want to handle, because it's a lot of responsibility for the company and there is cost involved, right? So again, getting back to just some of these philosophical corporate ideas that you're going to have, how you handle this and things, setting your precedents, I think becomes really important. I'm not, you know, advocating one way or the other, but just suffice to say that, you know, understanding what's required, because sometimes people use some students or maybe some trainees, you know, when they're still collaborating and co-developing, you know, with your academic institution, And then as your company grows, the idea is to bring people over. So just understanding where those folks may be in terms of their visa situation, if they are international, I think becomes really, really important. On the experience side, I like to say must have versus nice to have, right? I think we all want, somebody to have all these different skill sets. But again, back to Houston, we are an emerging ecosystem, right? So it's not like Boston and San Francisco where you can, have this very unique, if you will, maybe almost unicorn-like wish list and probably find somebody to come really, really close. So understanding, how important is it to have industry experience, or how important is it to your company that you want to take a trainee and mentor them through. So the must-haves versus the nice-to-haves, I think, are really important, and to get consensus around your teams, right? Because sometimes there are difference of opinion, right? There's some companies that I come across, and they want everybody to have industry experience. Well, sitting in Houston, we don't have a lot of industry, ergo, how much industry experience is sitting on the ground? Not a whole lot. So then you have to say, do you have money, right, to relocate people? Do you have money to recruit people from outside? So really understanding the must-haves, the nice-to-haves, and in the context of industry experience. Early career positions. So I'm making an assumption, this might not be the right assumption, but a lot of you still are developing your technology maybe within your academic institution. So it's probably still very much based in your lab, right? And you're probably first steps, if you do spin out something, you're still going to have a lot of what I would call, wet lab scientist one type of positions. A lot of times these are going to be very young people in their career. I tell people those positions, those early employee 1, 2, 3, and 4, it's really about fit. At the end of the day, if somebody has their PhD from one of our academic institutions, they've defended their thesis, at a baseline level, they know how to pipette and clean and do everything in the lab, right? But where the rubber meets the road in these employee 1, 2, 3, and 4 is that interpersonal skill, right? It's a small team of people. And if that person isn't a good fit, going back to the culture of your company, even though you're small, the philosophy of your company, if that person doesn't jive and fit, no matter how great they are in the lab, it's going to take time and energy and resource away. So those early career positions, fit, remember fit, have them talk to everybody, right? If you only have a 4-person company, it's not like you're wanting every person to have a vote, right? But you want to make sure that every person that's going to be interacting within your small company has the opportunity to meet and talk and give their impression, right? Because again, in a small company, you have to get along and everybody has to work together. It's very collaborative. There's not some place where you can just shove them in the corner to hide. Be prepared to mentor when in these early career positions. Again, because for most of these early career principal scientists, one, it might be their first job, since they're postdoc, right? So I think it's always important to understand that as the leader of your organization, you're also going to be a mentor, right? And making sure that you understand if you yourself cannot mentor, who else within your network may be great to help mentor your young talent. In the end, that's going to be beneficial to your overall organization. The other thing, and I put this one up here, it's not a forever position because I say this a lot. So most of my talkings is to students, right? Students coming out of the 4-year undergraduate degree, students coming out of a PhD program. So I do a lot of talking to students. And I keep on saying to them, it's not a forever position, right? And that's really important. Again, going back to the job description, for people to understand what's the task and, what does the career path look moving forward? And in these small companies, you don't really know, right? Because how much gas in the tank do you have and how far into the future can you realistically look at? So understanding that it's not a forever position, but understanding that there's a clear path and a clear between the employee and the employer about what it is that person is going to be doing and how the company is going to interface with the employee. Finding talent in Houston. Let's just say it's a very one-on-one process, right? It's not easy. I'm just going to be honest, right? Again, because we're an emerging community, it's not that there's a magic job board or a recruiter or somebody that can just kind of help you fill your positions. It goes back to understanding who you need and what you need and using your network, right? So most of you in here, I would assume, have been at your institutions for a while, that you've trained students that have either left to go on outside of your home institution to other markets, or have left to go into industry here locally. Those connections and those relationships are where you should start, right? Because at the end of the day, going back to the high risk, right? I'm going to say that a lot. This is a high risk business. I'm sure each and every one of you in this room has a really great asset that's really novel, and everybody thinks that it is going to change the game of oncology. But in reality, this is still high risk, right? And so the way you can kind of overcome the risk is how people can introduce you to other folks to come work and join you on your team. And that's really from your network. Your biggest resource is going to be your network. Career centers at all of the academic institutions, it's changing. And I know, Sarah, we've talked about this for a long time. Baylor, MD Anderson, Rice, UTM Galveston, they're training, right? They're training these PhDs, and most of them, I think, would like to believe that they're training PhDs to stay within academia. But really, that's not what's happening, right? And I think a lot of the young people today are coming in, I'm seeing it a lot, are coming in to get their PhD and to learn and to, develop ideas. But young people today all want their Zuckerberg moment. Like young people today all want to be an entrepreneur. Young people to even you, right? All of you folks today, in addition to having this great scientific pedigree and understanding science, everybody wants to be an entrepreneur. And so at the academic institutions, I'm very pleased that probably within the last 5 years, they are spending a little more time having career development outside of academia. So the one that I know the most and I engage the most with is Baylor College of Medicine, right? So Baylor, I believe, has put quite a bit of resource to at least having events, speakers, talking to their PhD students, in year 1 or year 2, understanding, are they trying to go the academic career route, or are they trying to go, industry consulting, some of these other things. So the career centers can be a really good resource for you within your own academic institution to see, who has self-identified that they are looking to do some of these entrepreneurial things. And that is, I think, a really great place for you to start. LinkedIn has also become a really kind of rich environment for posting opportunities. I think in my LinkedIn feed every day, I'm being fed at least half a dozen things, not just here in Houston, but throughout my network, right? So if you don't have a LinkedIn, or if your company, if you're already at the stage where you have a company, your company doesn't have LinkedIn, you probably want to think about getting one, right? Because that can be a good place, again, for you to engage and connect, and that whole sharing thing. And, it's kind of that exponential growth, right? So it might come to my feed, I share, somebody else just shares, and before you know it, it's kind of all over the place. There are some really good job boards. BioHouston has a job board that we make available to all of our members. I know that TMCX has one as well. Houston Exponential also had one. They're going through some transition right now, so I don't know how active their board is, but hopefully it'll get up and running. But using the local job boards as well, can be very helpful. And also for all of you going back to your job descriptions and seeing some of the functions that people are advertising, it actually becomes a good resource for you to better educate yourself about the competition. And then obviously networking, right? Networking becomes a really big piece of trying to figure out and find people for your company. And networking comes in all different shapes and sizes. So let me just start off by saying, we all need to do it and get out of your comfort zone, right? I think, you know, as I've met people throughout the community, I think sometimes making a generalization, sometimes scientists are a little bit quieter. And another reason why they kind of chose a profession where they can stay in the lab and, you know, kind of keep their head down and talk amongst themselves, right? So what I would say to each and every one of you is, you know, if there's one thing you take away from me jabbering up here is take some quiet time over the next, you know, week or so and really do a personal self-assessment and ask yourself, what is your networking comfort zone, right? What do you do? Do you find yourself, you know, going to an event, or do you find yourself asking a lab mate, hey, are you going? Do you make sure that you're going to know somebody there, or are you comfortable walking into a room and not knowing anybody? And as the CEO of a company, you're going to have to get yourself to the point of the lab. You're going to have to get yourself so comfortable that you can walk into a room and be able to walk up, hello, my name is, and have a conversation. So know your comfort zone and then push yourself to get out of that comfort zone. Know your audience. So each and every one of you, I have no doubt, can go to ASCO. You can stand up in the podium. You can talk to 500 people about your poster, about your science, no problem, right? That's where you live, right? But can you stand up in front of a same 500 people in a business audience, right? Knowing your audience and knowing how to talk to different audiences as a CEO of a company is so important. Even a community base, right? Can you get in front of just everyday people, the community, angel investors, right? And talk about your science and talk about your company and talk about yourself. So I'm going to jump to the bottom, the 3-minute thesis. How many of you have heard about 3-minute thesis at your academic institution? Nobody? One? So it's this program, I think it started in Australia, and it's usually for folks getting their PhD in any discipline really, but I'm familiar with the competitions they have at Rice and at Baylor. But basically, a student will use a slide to talk about their thesis work, right? And 3 minutes. And I say this to you because I'm a passionate believer that each and every one of you should be able to find one slide in your deck and in 3 minutes, talk about your company and what you're doing. So if you have a 3-minute thesis competition at your school, you might want to sign up or get somebody from your team to sign up if you have a student on your team. But it's a really good exercise, right? And then being able to take that 3-minute pitch, that 3-minute thesis, and then create variations. So be able to talk about your company and your science to a lay person like me with limited scientific background, to be able to talk to somebody who has a heavy business perspective. So forcing yourself to be able to talk about your company and your asset from all these different perspectives, right? Because as the CEO, you're going to find yourself in all of these different kind of networking communities, and you're going to need to be able to have those conversations. So start now and practice now, right? And get yourself prepared. So fun facts and icebreakers. When you're networking and you're walking into a room and you're talking to people, you have to have kind of some of your go-to things that you can use to break the ice or open the conversation, right? So start thinking about what are your fun facts about yourself? What are those icebreakers that you can use when you walk into a room? So for example, myself, right? I gave the little story of how I got to Houston, talked about how I got into biotech, right? I'm from Hawaii, so oftentimes I'll use being from Hawaii as a way to break the ice. So thinking about what are some of those things where you can start a conversation, right? You're going to have to learn how to start conversations. And again, whether you're raising capital from angel investors, whether you're raising capital from venture capitalists, if you're sitting at a dinner table with somebody that may be wanting to learn more about your company, you know, being able to switch it on, switch it off, start conversations, you got to do it. You just have to do it. And understanding what your style is, I think is where to start. So lots of different networking opportunities in Houston. And I'd say probably, you know, naturally during the summer, things tend to slow down anyway, because people in Houston usually tend to leave Houston in the hotter months. So we'll have a few things going on in the community, but come fall, many of these organizations will have networking opportunities. So I'd encourage you to get on everybody's listservs and to start again, you know, seeing the different breakfast meetings, cocktails, you know, different things that are happening, and force yourself, right? Again, it's so easy. I know you're all busy and you're in the lab, but it's force yourself to get out and meet and interact. That's the best way that you're going to get kind of a head start, right? Even at the end of the day, if you decide not to spin out a company, even if at the end of the day you don't have a startup in this, from this cohort, it doesn't mean that you're not going to have something down the road, right? So it's networking and interfacing and interacting, to me, is something you just need to be doing anyway. It's good for all of us. So in addition to Bio Houston, so we are, you know, kind of the trade organization, the hub for the Houston community. There are regional organizations throughout the state of Texas. So Austin and Research Valley, Bio North Texas, THBI, and Biomed SA. So all of us do events, networking, there are opportunities to convene and resources with all of these organizations. And so again, I would encourage you, I don't think everybody's from Houston. I think there are a couple of people from the North Texas area, UT Southwestern, so Bio North Texas. Kathleen Otto runs that group. They have a big annual conference every September called IC3. For Houston, Bio Houston does a event every November. We partner with Rice University. So this year it'll be November 9th and 10th. I'd encourage all of you to, you know, block your calendars and come and participate. But it's a really, again, another nice way to network. And just because you're in Houston, it doesn't mean you can't go and take part in, you know, something that's happening in Dallas or Austin or things in other parts of the community. I'll say that, you know, for Houston, we're fortunate, obviously, because the medical center is right here. But as we look at Dallas and Austin and San Antonio, each of those regions are growing as well in terms of their life sciences opportunities and capabilities. So I would encourage you to tap into those markets, because if you do end up spinning your company and having to raise capital, these regions are actually natural places for you to go to look for funding. Well, building relationships, it takes time. It does. I mean, this is something that you're going to be doing from now, even past retirement, right? Building relationships take time. And it's a two-way street. So what I say to people all the time is, you know, when you meet certain people and you're trying to establish a rapport and build, it's not just what can you do for me, right? You need to understand the other side of the table and what would make the relationship beneficial, right? And what would make it this give and take. And I'll tell you, if you think about it from that perspective, things move and progress much quicker. If the person on the other side that you're trying to establish a relationship only gets inbound calls, can you help me? Can I find? Do you know? You know, if it's only that kind of a relationship, you're not going to get anywhere, right? But if it's a relationship, it's a two-way street. So getting to know how you can be helpful to the person on the other side. And helpful, it might just mean, getting together once a quarter and having lunch and just helping each other, get out of the office and have conversation, right? So it doesn't have to mean like this transaction, but it just means, what is it about you and the other person that the other person on the other side feels like it's a good use of their time, that they enjoy the company, that there's something positive for them as well, and it's not just this sucking of something that people are always asking them for, right? I think the other thing I'll say is pay it forward, right? So as you figure out, are you going to do a startup? Do you eventually spin your company out? Do you get things going? And hopefully you'll have progress and do well. When people come behind and are starting out and ask you for advice, remember all those that helped you, right? Remember all the people that gave you a free coffee to talk about this, or gave you some advice about how they did something. So carve out, as part of your building relationships, carve out a portion of giving back, right? Whether it's to your institution, your alma mater, your children's school for, bring your child to work day, all these different things. I mean, there's different ways of building relationships and paying it forward. I think relationships also, remember, it's not just from this business perspective. Houston is the fourth largest city in the country, okay? Home to all of the big energy companies, home to the and largest medical center in the world. Business here is transacted like a small town. It is. The handshake, interpersonal, it's a much slower case, a much slower pace, cadence. So as you're building these relationships, keep that in mind, right? Keep in mind that this is a very community city, right? It's a very touch point city. And because of that, you never know what setting you might be in where an opportunity or a connection can happen, right? So don't go to things and don't approach things with preconceived ideas and preconceived notions, because you'll be limiting yourself, right? So find networking opportunities that may not be in healthcare, right? It might just be, a Vistage group for first-time, entrepreneurs, or it might be Toastmasters, or it might be something at the Rotary, or it might just be something at, your local community center. All of these places will provide really rich networking opportunities, and you'll never know who you'll meet there, right? It's all about just the connection. And Houston is a very entrepreneurial city in other industries, right? So one thing I found is business owners, entrepreneurs, people that started things on their own, they have a passion for that, and they're willing to help and talk to others. So again, don't limit yourself to the kinds of networking and the kind of communities you're going at. Could be at your church, it could be at the PTA, it could be on the soccer field. Like, I have seen more connections happen in these kind of non-traditional groupings than you can imagine. And then online resources. I mean, there's a whole bunch of free online resources with regards to job posting, both nationally, locally, obviously the Bio Houston, but these, if you're not already reading some of these trades, I'd highly encourage you to do so. Again, when we go back to the beginning of my slide talk where I talked about, paying on a national scale, I think it's really important for all of you to know what's happening nationally, right? In your area and in different locales. One of the things that I find makes life sciences biotech so exciting is you can compete on so many different levels. And what I mean by that is, in my experience at my last biotech where we got bought by Pfizer, we were in an indication called pulmonary arterial hypertension, PAH, okay? We had a drug, Actelion had a drug, United Therapeutics had a drug, Gilead had a drug, and then us Myogen, so there were some of us little companies and some of the big people. And so I think sometimes you also have to remember that while you're a startup building something very small, you could be competing with much larger companies. So making sure you understand the marketplace on a global and a national basis becomes really, really important. And these publications can all help you. Okay, so I think my rambling has gone on for long enough. I'd love to open it up to questions. Anybody have thoughts, questions, something that maybe I said that you didn't agree with, or you want me to explain more, or anybody? Oh, yeah.
So I guess you talked about several organizations around you. So, I mean, as a faculty, as you said, we tend to stay in the house and work on the project. How can we go out? Like, we know there are any events or dinner or.
Yeah. So, going back to this here, getting on the listservs for all of these organizations is really important. Like BioHouston, we do a monthly newsletter. At the bottom of our newsletter, we talk about upcoming events, and we'll highlight not just stuff happening here, but happening throughout the region. Obviously the TMC has a big listserv, TMCX. I know they do a lot of postings, but getting yourself on as many different listservs is great. The other thing is on LinkedIn, you'll see people posting and promoting different things. If you're going to a medical conference, a lot of times they have side dinners, events. Do an inquiry, right? Ask the organizers of the conference. Sometimes you'll see who all the corporate sponsors are. You can reach out to a sponsor and say, hey, look, I see that you're sponsoring this. Are you hosting any receptions or dinners, right? So get out of your comfort zone and just ask, right? Somebody may say no, but at least you asked. BioHouston is always open as a resource. So I'm happy to sit down with you, understand kind of what you're building and where you want to go. And then, if we can make introductions, we're happy to do that as well, or at least have you on our radar so that if there's something that we think might be a good benefit or fit to you, we can let you know. Anybody else?
So what do you do in the November event?
Oh, okay. The November event, the Texas Life Science Forum. Yeah, so it really is a multifaceted event. We do in the morning a plenary session. So for example, this past Life Science Forum, which we held in February, because last November COVID was still too high, so we had to punt to February. But Dr. Stephen Hahn, who was the past FDA commissioner, he was our keynote speaker. We had obviously TMC was there talking about TMC3 and innovation. We have a lot of venture capitalists and sessions around building companies and investment opportunities. And then we do a pitch, for lack of a better word, where we have about 50 companies at various stages come and give their 4-minute elevator pitch. So and then we have a session that we call the educational symposia. So we have somebody from FDA regulatory or somebody giving a one-on-one on, latest practices in IP or what have you. So very different topical things, right? But what it is, it's an opportunity to showcase the whole life sciences community in Houston. I think what we do really well here is a lot of this early innovation, right? But you'll hear me say when I get on my soapbox, to really have a vibrant ecosystem where we aspire to be like a Boston or a San Francisco or North Carolina, right? You need companies at all ends of the spectrum, right? So you're going to have a ton of companies in this early startup stage, absolutely. But if you're really going to have a successful community, then you're going to need companies like Immatics and companies like Bellicum and companies like Alnos, where, they're making it into the clinic. Yes, some of them have had stub toes and failures, and that happens, right? Again, this is a high risk business, but you need to have that churn and you need to have those companies to get to a certain heft where people have experiences. And so the Life Sciences Forum, we tend to highlight some of those companies as well. Lexicon Pharmaceuticals, Livanova, Castle Biosciences, some of those companies that are a little further down or with marketed products even. Does that help?
Yeah, so need to pay to register.
Yeah, so the good news for all of you is most of you are affiliated with an academic institution. So we always have an academic rate. I think it's like $50. So it's not very much. And really it covers the box lunches and the food and on all of that. But if for some reason, and I understand that, budgets and things can be tight, if for some reason, that doesn't work into the budget for your department, your institution, you can always send me an email and we can always figure something out, right? That's the other thing. And I think this is something that you can even impart to your younger staff and, maybe folks that you're mentoring, is that you should always ask, can I volunteer? And I mean, I'll be honest, even at this level of your career, don't think volunteering is not good, right? Volunteering doesn't have an age limit. And I sometimes would encourage all of you to do that, right? To come to a conference and say, hey, look, the price tag is $1,000. We don't have it in our budget. Can I volunteer? Absolutely. We're always looking for volunteers.
Yeah, it's well worth it. I gotta say, joining Bio Houston, going Life Science Forum, and I would also make a plug for the chili cook-off.
Yeah.
I think when you're especially in the busy academic setting, you're always like, is it worth the time? It is absolutely worth the time for any number of reasons. The chili's awesome, the social event's awesome, but also because it's a social event, you actually get an opportunity to interact with people in that non-stress, not asking for anything environment. You're just talking and learning about people, and it's so valuable. I found that to be one of the most valuable events every year.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, the vast majority of opportunities here in Houston at most of the companies right now are not advertised. The vast majority of opportunities come from meeting people, right? And a lot of times I'll get resumes. And again, this is kind of why getting to know people becomes so important. I'll just get resumes from people and they say, hey, if something ever comes up, or if I take a meeting with just somebody, I'll always ask, hey, can you just give me your CV, your resume, just so I can put your experience in perspective. But going back to me saying these companies are small and they're building teams and fit. So a lot of times somebody will meet somebody somewhere and hit it off really well. I mean, you all might like Manchester City, or you all, have something in common and get along well. And that person will remember that interaction. And then when something comes up, and it may not be for a full-time, it may be a project, it may be for a KOL, it may be something, they'll say, oh my goodness, I remember X from that interchange, and that's how it happens. So most of the opportunities here in Houston, and most of the time people connect with companies, is really because of interactions they had, and less about answering something on a job board.
So what we need to do if our company startup is interested to give that 4-minute pitch, what we need to do?
Yeah, so we'll do a call for presenters in about August, and it's an online, it's very easy. You put your slide deck, you fill out a few questions, and then we look at all the applicants, and then we, invite 50 to come and present.
So it has to be local, Houston-based company?
No,
outside?
No, outside. In fact, we had quite a few Canadian companies this year. We have some from Europe. I'd say the bulk of the companies are from Texas, but we do have folks from outside. Yeah.
So you give some privilege, I guess, to this cohort of students.
Yes, well, I will say that part of what should happen is that, especially in this particular case, is that you would have had a lot of interaction. I believe tomorrow you're meeting Dr. Cunningham and Dan Watkins. So you would have had a lot of input from a lot of folks on your pitches and on refinement. So yes, by the time you submit your application, you'll have a very, very nice package to submit.
By August, and some of you are already in the process of doing this or are asking our questions to make this happen. People who are starting to think towards incorporation, really moving forward substantially this year, are starting to do that, right? So you should have that. And we're starting the conversations now with many of you transitioning your scientific decks to more of like, how do you start to have more of a business type deck? What are your milestones when you're talking to people? And those decks I use those decks for recruitment as much as for investor conversations, because those are parallel processes. So you should be able to, just like when you're doing your scientific presentation, anytime somebody asks you to come do a scientific presentation last minute, or maybe you forgot, you're like, it's okay, I've done this a million times, I can cut a new set of slides by tomorrow, no problem. You'll get in the habit of doing the same thing. So applying for Bio Houston this fall should be easy, and of course, we're always here to be working with you. So we're gonna help you on those stories, and don't just send stuff to Ann Cole, like that's what we're here for.
So I really resonate your point on the ecosystem. Right? So I mean, during the last 10 years, we have been struggling to establish this ecosystem for the biotech company, but still, we are in, as you said, the infant stage. We do have a lot of academic IPs, a lot of assets here, but as you mentioned, we need to establish companies. But from the early stage to the established will take, drug therapeutics will take 10 to 15 years to get a drug approved. But how can we do that to reach that stage? You need to think about after 10 years or 15 years to have those companies around.
Yeah, I think what I'll say is, it kind of takes a village, and what I mean by that is, some of our companies, I like to say, are side hustle, right? And I mean no disrespect to all of you academics. Please don't take this the wrong way. But when you do a therapeutic drug development company in an oncology space, it is a full-time deal, right? So understanding as scientific founders, if you're not going to want to hit the eject from your academic post, right, that's fine. But understanding that as a scientific founder, your role in the company changes and you find somebody who's going to be the CEO. So some of the problem, I'm just going to be honest, is the fact that we have a little bit of tension between some of the things that are getting started where people don't want to give it everything it needs, right? And even from a capital point, right? So money is very sophisticated and people peel under the, there's 24 hours in a day and people are saying, okay, this is coming out of X, but everybody here has full-time jobs everywhere else, right? So if I give you my dollar, what are you going to do with my dollar? Because everybody has a day job, right? So you have to be very thoughtful. Yes, at some point, you can't hit the eject button, but there is a clear place in time where your team has to be focused on this 100%. Just has to be. And I think in our ecosystem, that's been a little hard for people. A lot of people, so again, I'm going to say something, private citizen and Tanabe, not Bio Houston, okay? Private citizen. So, I go back to, we're in the energy capital, right? We're in the energy town. And it's really, you go to PTA, soccer, any kind of social event, right? Probably for every, whatever, there's 10 people in the room, 5 or 6 are in the energy sector, somebody's a lawyer. And if anybody's in healthcare or life sciences, right? Right, to the healthcare. Many people are practicing clinicians, okay? But it's really cool and groovy to be a biotech CEO, right? So I work at Baylor, I have a lab, but I'm biotech CEO. No. You try to do that in Boston and San Francisco, you get locked out of the room, right? A biotech CEO is 100% in as a biotech CEO. You're a founding scientist and you're a founder, but do you see what I'm trying to get at? And we have a lot of companies in our ecosystem right now that have just been plodding along, right? We need to, as a community, have more vigor and say to folks like, if something is limping along for 10 years and not getting funded, probably not something. And so let's kill it and start something new, right? So I'm very passionate about this because a lot of people come to me like, well, what are you doing? Why is this not happening, right? It's not just me and it's not just Bio Houston. I throw it back, right, on the community, right? Because if you're just side hustling your company and limping it along because you want to be able to say, and I'm a biotech CEO, you're not helping.
So I guess that's the point. So what do we do to do this? Like influence the political.
No, so
agenda
when
or-
you, yeah, so when you roll out your companies and you're the founding scientist, you find a CEO that's engaged, you find a CEO that can raise money. Because remember, right, in the earliest stage of capital, what are they giving you money for? Yeah, your asset is great, yes, but they're giving you money as a CEO to be able to execute on those milestones. So equally important is not just rolling it out, but putting it in the hands of somebody that can execute and meet the timeline. That's critical. People with experience. Sarah knows my thing, right? People with experience. So, I mean, again, I mean, no disrespect, but if you're gonna give it to your postdoc, right, to be the CEO, I, as an investor, do I really want to give your postdoc money? What has your postdoc done to be able to know that in a company setting, right, in an industry setting, they can execute and move forward? So you have to make that shift.
Yeah, just I mean, I don't, little color if it's okay. It's just, you know, it's a little bit of all of the above. It's like, who's gonna be the full-time person? Sometimes it is a postdoc. How do you meet these people? That's a question we're always getting asked, right? Is you go to one of these wonderful events and you just start talking to people. You just make it your goal to meet people. And one of the great things about Houston is you can meet most of the key people, or at least the people who know the key people, and you can get access if you're making a conscious effort. The faculty members I've seen be successful and who have spun out multiple companies show up to these events and are part of that community, even if they are still sitting in an academic setting. They view themselves as an active part of that process. So that's worth keeping in mind. And then what you're looking for in these conversations, and you're talking to Anne and you're talking to the other people you know, and you're trying to figure out what does that look like? How do you actually get the progress done? And to sort of put a finer point on it, maybe it looks like a postdoc, maybe it looks like a part-time CEO where you're getting going and then you get funding. You're looking for people to be actively involved and show that you're making progress. And if you're not making progress every week, you don't have the right people involved. Right? Once you're on startup time, once you've decided to do a startup, every day, every week, you should be able to point to things that have gotten done. Right?
Yeah, and I think sometimes also, this is a tough business, right? Most things fail. So if you get to a point, knowing that it hasn't worked out, to shut it down and start all over and start the next, right? Because that's the other thing where you gain so much credibility. Because everybody knows how tough it is to shut something down, right? But let me tell you, for those teams that acknowledged and understood that it just wasn't right? The sentiment for that has changed, or somebody just published a paper that theory is, doesn't seem to pan out. Don't force it, right? And if you're not able to raise capital, and the feedback you're getting is that, hey, this is interesting science, but there's not a market opportunity, understand that and take that and say, okay, great, it's good science. Let me go back and find something else where there is a market opportunity, right? Because at the end of the day, that's kind of how this all works out, right? Understanding, what you're developing and where's the unmet medical need, what's the commercial path forward, what's the regulatory, you have to be able to kind of see all that through. And if along the way, it starts to show that some of that stuff doesn't work, right? Forcing it is never gonna, and waiting it out and all of that, that just doesn't help anybody. And teams get more points for stopping and saying, hey, it's time.
So if I understand right, if I'm starting a company with a product and it doesn't work, so we can bring another product to the same company. No legal issues.
No. Depending, I mean, it depends on, is it that you have the asset and you have a next gen that you have the rights to and you can do? That could be one thing. Is it that you have a company and your current lead just doesn't work and it falls apart, but you have cash? You can go acquire something else and bring it through. I mean, there's different ways of doing things, right?
No legal, if it's really, really early, I think sometimes people get hung up on, oh, I formed this company, I have to do something. It's just a structure. It's not too precious. Sometimes a honorable discontinuation is a viable option, right? Just like a project in the lab.
It leaves a
What a good
mark
time
on the
check.
internet, right? We form a company, which tracks, so it will be there forever.
The reason you form a company is to have a legal entity to tie things to, so if it doesn't work, you don't lose your house. Right? So it's a separate entity that does not have to exist for any particular reason other than as its own legal entity.
Yeah.
All right, I want to do a time check for Anne because it's already 12:03, and for ourselves as well because we have a busy afternoon going on, and I believe there's probably lunch outside if I had to hazard a guess. So, thank you so much. This has been awesome. As you all can tell, though, here's what I will say that everybody should view this as a flavor of the wonderful information that you can gain by talking to Anne and people like Anne, especially Anne, who's one of my favorite people to talk to. So, sign up for all of those mailing lists, I promise you, and then, start